Hello everyone, welcome to a very special video presentation for the Paranormal Day Quarantine-a-con. My name is Hillary Stone and today I'm joined by my friend and co-founder of Mystic Mitten Paranormal Group, Jessica Krutell. Mystic Mitten Paranormal Group is a female-led paranormal investigation team based out of St. Clair Shores, Michigan. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of photo preservation, sharing one of our favorite hobbies with you. We're also going to be sharing stories about how photos have helped us in our paranormal investigations and teach you how to use the resources available at your local library to research photos. We're also going to be sharing an intuitive exercise and teach you how to scribe photos as well.
We want to thank Haunt Jaunts and Haunt Magazine, as well as Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Center for hosting this wonderful event.
So Jessica and I love to collect old photos. I think both of us have very large individual collections. Together, our collection is quite large and impressive. One of the things that we bonded on early on in our friendship and early on in the beginning of Mystic Mitten was going together to different antique stores looking for photos and then sharing our finds with each other. What would you tell people one of your favorite things about collecting old photos is?
I greatly appreciate old photographs for many reasons. One of those reasons is that back in the day, pictures were very expensive. They were hard to come by, and we weren't carrying around a camera in our pockets like we do with our cell phones today. So sometimes back in the day, you could live your whole life and never have a picture taken of you. So the family at your funeral would take a postmortem photograph after you had already passed, just so that way the family would have something to remember you by. So old pictures, even though they are, often preserved on paper, that moment in time meant something to somebody. Someone had a reason why they captured that picture, whether it's of their dog, of their flowers, their wedding dress, or their loved one who is now deceased. So it's important to cherish those memories that meant somebody to somebody at one point along the way. We're both avid antiquers. I go to estate sales. There was actually one time I was in an estate sale and I found some photographs in the trash can. And I had actually picked those photographs out of the trash can. And I went up and I paid for these pictures that were going to be thrown away. Just because these are important memories and it's important for us to hang on to them. And I like to look at them as adopted family members. It's incredibly satisfying to be able to put them in a picture frame and hang them up on my wall. You can kind of see some over here in this general area of that collection. And it's so satisfying to be able to display that picture proudly of, some moment in time that has some really deep meaning to somebody. So I like to just kind of adopt them for myself. It's so much better than them just being thrown away and forgotten about forever.
There is an element of preservation, especially with some of the oldest photos, like the photos from the Victorian era, the different cabinet cards, things like that, where there weren't any photo negatives or there aren't very many. At least there's probably only one, maybe two at most copies of some of these photos. And even that, was kind of rare. So when you own these photos, you're really, it is kind of a rare item to own just because it's so limited. And so being able to preserve and keep some of these old photos and memories and these snapshots of people who are obviously no longer with us is kind of maybe a hobby people would look at and think is a little bit creepy, but there's so much love. It comes from a place of love for you and I, and wanting to memorialize these people, and there's a loving bond. We don't just buy them because we think they're creepy or spooky, or we form a little bond with the people, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I know when I'm out hunting, I look for ones that strike me with their personality, and we'll pick that back up towards the end of this presentation. And one thing to go off of too, back in the day, most the negatives would have been on glass plates. So they would have been incredibly fragile, which is why the negatives aren't really floating around or as easily accessible as they were, today. So that definitely factors into it as well.
Another thing we've noticed too, as far as state to state goes, that states with warmer climates have fewer photos typically available because the paper doesn't fare as well as it might in some of the northern states. So up in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, places like that, there's often a lot of photos because the weather is more conducive for some of those older things surviving in people's attics and barns. A lot of times that's where these kind of things are found before they make it to the antique stores or online, or the private collections that we're buying some of these things from too. So that's something really interesting that we've noticed. As far as, so Michigan, we're especially lucky to live in Michigan and have access to so many photos and so many paper antique goods as well.
Today, actually, somebody had posted a free lot on Craigslist of old photos and postcards and photo albums. And to the gentleman, he just found them in his basement while he was cleaning, and he's like, I have no desire, or like, I don't even know who these people are, like, so they're free. So immediately I was like, oh, me please.
Yeah.
So I went and I picked up like it's like one of those like file boxes. I picked up one of those today, just full of random treasures. So I'm really excited to dig through that and see, what kind of memories I'm able to save that, potentially he could have just thrown out because they didn't have any significance to him. So it's really good feeling. I feel like, I just like rescued them. You know what I mean?
You really did. There's a collection that I have too that is a little bit newer as far as the photos that I typically collect. It's from around the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And this was a collection of photos that somebody had passed away, and one of our friends had, Dorothy, had purchased these for me because she just was, like, she saw them online and she was like, oh, I don't want those to go in the trash, and Hillary will take good care of them. So she bought them for me. And one of my projects, I think, for this year is going to be to scan all of them, put them online so people can look at them, and so that I have a digital copy of them, and then see if I can't try and find some information about the family that they belong to, and see if any of the other relatives might be interested in keeping these photos or having me, send them. So there is kind of a, dreaming of the satisfying feeling of reuniting someone with their family photos is kind of a fun new project or new quest that's kind of coming out of our photo collecting.
There was one time I was in an estate sale, and I was the family reunited with the photographs. And it was in a neighborhood very close to where my grandfather's house was. So that would have been where my dad and my aunt and uncle grew up. And the basement had recent pictures from like the early 90s. And I was flipping through them, and I just, like, my heart just like totally skipped a beat, because I realized that these were pictures of the St. Clair Shore City Parade, the Memorial Day Parade, from across where we were viewing it. So even though these were pictures that, were taken of like the clowns or the Shriners or the different floats going by, my family's in the background. So these are memories and moments that I have with my grandparents when I'm like probably 4, 5, 6 years old, maybe max,
Oh.
that like I didn't even know that I had. And it was like my whole family. So we like just sat there, my mom and I, and we like closed out that estate sale, and we go up to the desk and we're like, look at these pictures are of us. They're like, you can just have them, just take them. So that's like that's a really special moment. So I think there's a lot, being the person who was able to find, this picture that I didn't even know existed and be able to be reunited with that is a really magical feeling. And those are some of my favorite pictures that I've ever got from an estate sale, because they're pictures of my family and my grandparents that are no longer with me. So it's a really nice feeling.
That's amazing. What are the odds of that? How crazy. There's another piece that we found that's hanging out in my basement. This is another piece that I'm hoping to reproduce digitally this year. You and I went to with our friend Erica. We went to this antique book and paper show near Lansing, Michigan. I think we were.
Correct. Yep.
And we did some great antiquing on that trip. Got lots of other little photos and other mementos. And there was a little school day scrapbook. So like from the, I believe it was from like the 30s, 1930s, and it was a nice little scrapbook that someone had put together while they were in high school. It was a woman, and my hope is that the school that she went to no longer exists, but it's my hope that we'll be able to find someone from maybe an alumni association or somebody from the library in that town that might be looking for some of that. So once we get some copies of that, I'm hoping that might be another thing we're able to kind of take home and have an adventure doing that. So I think that'll be kind of cool to see how that plays out.
It's really important too that if you, especially if you are in an area, like I noticed, like when I was at antique stores in Florida, correct me if I'm wrong, but I specifically was like, do you have any old pictures? They had two. And this
Yeah.
like giant antique store, they had two. So I came back from Florida with like two old photographs. And if you're in an area that's like super humid, like Florida, like go ahead and try to scan these pictures in now, and we'll kind of cover that later. But it's really important for the preservation of the pictures if you're in an area that the climate doesn't necessarily allow for paper products to be preserved on their own, to try to get these documents scanned in so that way they're still accessible before the paper is no longer sufficient.
Mm-hmm. Now, photo collecting is a hobby that isn't very expensive. Obviously, if you get very obsessed with it like we are, the quantity and the volume that you'll want to accumulate can become kind of pricey. But as far as individual photos go, typically they're not very expensive, less than $10, about 2 to 4, even $1 photos are usually the ones that I end up picking. So it's not a very expensive hobby. And then, some of the things that you can get to help preserve them or keep them neat and tidy aren't very expensive either, would you say?
Yeah, I agree. And if you are like a huge avid collector, of course, like things can be expensive, but it depends on how much you're willing to pay for it. So, I honestly, in my own personal collection, I don't think that I've spent more than $10 on a photograph. However, if I were to list some of my photographs on eBay, like some of them are definitely, to the right person, could cost more than that. But in the grand scheme of things, though, it's a pretty cheap hobby. Um, it's one that I would say my husband gets like annoyed with. That's one of those things where I like sneak the pictures into the house and then just kind of merge with the rest of my collection, and then he has no idea. So at least it's an easy one to cover.
They're easy to hide. So, what would you say the number one reason that photo preservation is important? What's like
Oh
the top
geez,
one? What would you think or say?
there's so many reasons though. There's so many reasons. I mean, even for, I probably would say just for like genes and researching and your family tree and being able to hunt down relatives that you didn't even know that you had existed. Genealogy is a very hot topic right now. It's very popular with, all of the different DNA testing and trying to trace all of that down. But like I said, these pictures, like there might only be one that exists of one single person, and that's the only photograph that they've had taken of them their whole life.
Yeah.
And I know me personally, like I'm curious about that. Like I want to know what my family looks like, and kind of like trace that a little bit. And thankfully, before my grandfather passed, he did do some researching. At least on my father's side, so I do have access to some of those materials. But it's important for things like that, but at the same time, like it's also really important if you're a paranormal investigator.
Yes.
There's so many times and chances, like when you're trying to figure out the case and you're like, okay, so what apparition have you seen? What's going on here? And then you're able to research it, and it's amazing when we've had that happen. With one case in particular where the apparitions that were seen in that general area, we were able to research the family that had owned that land many years ago and show these pictures of a father and of his daughter. And people are saying, yeah, that's exactly who I saw. And being able to kind of like trace that back, and kind of solidify and help help our clients essentially like not feel crazy about it, because here's the proof, like
Right.
exactly who you saw, and this is his name, and here's the history, and being able to tie it all together. And apparitions, at least for me, like I've only seen one my whole life. It's very rare to come by, but in particular cases, that's how we can definitely link the family or whoever had passed, who is still hanging out in that general area, to the actual haunting itself.
Mm-hmm. So we as paranormal investigators rely on the archival and preservation work that libraries do, different historical societies do, even the people who own a lot of these photos, like people with very extensive family albums or collections of family photos, because so many of these collections rely on the generosity of the people who own them to donate digital copies or donate them to be digitally reproduced for a time. So it's very important, and this is one of the cool things if you're lucky enough to come from a family with a huge collection like that, is you can get in touch with your local historical society or your local library and find out if they're collecting pictures for their archives or their online resources or even their local history center. We're very lucky. Our St. Clair Shores Public Library has a local history center. It's very well funded and very organized and wonderful. I know not every library is that fancy, but most cities and most towns have archives and have a place where all of the historical information about the town, photos, documents, records, things like that are stored. And so even beyond photos, there are so many different resources that paranormal investigators can use to tie historical facts, or at least, to debunk certain things or to understand a property or a location in a way that really like Jessica said, makes the clients feel less crazy. It makes it's more exciting. It makes the whole thing feel more real. When we're excited about finding some kind of activity and historical facts to back it up. So we rely very heavily on all of that, dedicated work that goes into preserving and making these photos and documents available for us to reference in our research. So.
And librarians, as well as any employee at a library, they are so helpful and so willing to get right in there and start, like looking through certain books and pulling out maps and going in. Like our library has like a historical section, but then there's like a part that's like closed off in the historical section, going out into that area where it's not, open to the public necessarily, and pulling out different resources essentially to assist with the research process. They're incredibly willing. I think it's a fun project. It's something that they enjoy. Anyone who works at a library, they're passionate about books, and they're passionate about history and research and maps and education and genealogy. And it's something that they have a lot of fun with too. So don't be afraid to ask for help from your local librarians, because they greatly enjoy it.
And you don't have to be a professional paranormal investigator by any means to do research on your home, or even different family members. Or if you find a photo with some information on the back, you can go and do all of this research. This is available to everyone, all of us as tax-paying citizens. You can visit the archives and do some of this stuff and kind of participate in this, investigation for yourself. So genealogy projects, zoning projects, all kinds of things. The local library is probably the most valuable resource for us as in our investigations, I would say.
And Heidi, who was mainly our main point of contact in assisting us, every time that we go visit the St. Clair Shores Public Library, she knew we were up to something, because like you never really know how somebody's going to take it when you say, I'm a paranormal investigator and I'm here trying to research a ghost. Like,
right.
But she was super interested and understanding, and she wasn't judgy or anything. Like, she was like, oh, cool. Like, I get it. Like, yeah, let me look up all of this stuff and let me help you. And I'm going to add you to my notepad. And this is what I'm going to be doing. When it's slow, I just do more research for you. And so it was really cool. It was kind of like we're just going to tread lightly to make sure that like this isn't going to be weird. But she was super, super easygoing. And she's become a really great tool for us as well.
We get so lucky. People are always so eager and willing to help us. And, I think part of it is the enthusiasm and the, excitement that we come in with too. People can't help but, it's a little contagious. They can't help but get excited too. So as long as you're kind and nice to someone, you'll find all kinds of people along your path willing to help you and willing to help guide you. And so we're grateful for that. We've had so many nice experiences and so many lovely people who have stepped up to help us find things or point us in directions that we never would have considered or find little nuggets of information that we never would have found if we hadn't had nice conversations with them. So much of investigation and so much of what we do involves talking to other people and building these relationships and oh, what you're saying reminds me of this. Let me pull this book and kind of, just flowing with the moment and seeing what happens. One of our favorite examples of how photos have impacted or played a part in our investigations was the story that Jessica was referencing earlier, and the name of these people that we were able to find all this photo information and historical information on, their last name was Hatzenbuehler. And if you've watched our YouTube videos, or if you haven't, you can check out there is a ghost hunting in Harrison Township video series on our channel where we investigated a private residence and we're able to find these photos and connect these little dots and compare the apparitions that people had reported they were seeing to these photos.
And what was really awesome about this case is that using the library, we were able to trace down this map. And essentially, these are newer houses, so it's not always necessarily that the house itself is haunted, but sometimes it's the land, the property that the house sits upon. So back in the day, it was all owned by the Hatzenbuehler family. And many of the neighbors in that area, have experienced similar apparitions. One of a little girl who has a bow in her hair, and then one of a gentleman who is ironically wearing a hat. And that's kind of interesting too, because that is also a tie to its last name. Now, the little girl, Stella, she did not pass away when she was a child. However, those were her heydays. There's stories that we were able to find online about how the little kids would like skip class to go play. That was the best time of her life. So if you pass away, you don't always come back necessarily as your state that you were in when you died. I am a firm believer that like if I were to die, like I wouldn't want to come back when I'm old and wrinkly. Like I want to come back when I'm having fun and I'm spicy. And so it's really interesting. But with these photographs that we were able to trace down, we can confirm that the apparition sightings are in fact of Stella, because there's a picture of her with a bow in her hair. And it's just a really cool thing, because it's multiple houses in that same neighborhood that are experiencing similar things and experiencing these similar apparitions. And you can tell like the weight is lifted off their shoulders when they're like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. Like, this is great. Like, this is exactly who I'm seeing. So now then that brings in a different level too, a more personal level with the paranormal, because then you can address said spirits by name. So instead of saying, like, children, we have to go to bed, like Gracie needs to get some sleep, you can say, Stella, it's Gracie's bedtime. So I think that brings in a different level, a different personal connection, and that kind of helps, make the paranormal more normal, as my saying goes. But then you can kind of start to look at the spirits as roommates who start to, float in time to time and just kind of pop in for a short visit, rather than like some scary oogie boogie monster. So it's definitely helpful, because then you're able to connect it. And then, as people, we just resonate with that a little bit more.
So the last thing that we're going to talk about today is kind of walking you through or giving you an intuitive exercise that you can practice, or something to chew on and take away from this digital experience that you've shared with us today. And now this is kind of the concept of photo scrying. And now this is a technique that I use sometimes to try and get some information for, fun, or just to add an element to our investigation to see if there's anything that I can intuitively pull out of the picture. And so scrying, what that means is really anything you may have heard scrying used in reference to mirrors or crystal balls or obsidian balls. And what that is the art or the act of settling into something and kind of allowing your vision to shift from your eye vision to your third eye vision or your mind's eye vision. And so what you can do is you can take a photo and sit with it in a comfortable position. You could light a candle, you could play some soft music, or you could just sit in silence and sit for several minutes, as long as you can, or as long as you're comfortable, and just try and clear your mind and kind of stare at the photo, stare at the person. And in the same way that, those seeing eye books we used to have when we were kids, kind of allow your eyes to go blurry and absorb the picture, look at the picture not as you normally would, but in a way that you're trying to look at the picture's essence. And so allow yourself to receive different messages or little pictures or information. And the way that you can kind of check some of this, and that can also be kind of a fun activity to involve your family in, or some research activities into, is if you don't know any information about the person that you're scrying, or the person's photo that you're scrying, but someone else has information that you could check yourself with, you can take some notes while you're doing this intuitive exercise or this photo scrying exercise, and then compare your notes with the facts that other people or your family member might know about maybe your relatives or family friends. So that can be a good kind of way to kind of check your work. So you don't have to put a lot of pressure on yourself. Just try and see what you get about somebody's personality, some of the things that they like, some of their personality traits, what they may have been like when they were alive, or if they're alive, or if they're dead. So this can be kind of a fun thing for you to try to kind of flex your intuitive muscles, or your psychic muscles, if you will, and give it a shot. So have fun with it.
Once again, this is Jessica and Hillary with Mystic Mitten Paranormal, located in Metro Detroit. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And feel free to give us a follow. We're located on multiple social media sites. Hillary's better at rattling those off, but we do have a YouTube channel as well. And thank you once again to everybody who put this on. This is a really wonderful program, and it's a great way for us to be able to connect with others that we normally wouldn't be able to, and all from the safety of our home. So thank you guys. Please make sure that you take care, wash your hands, and stay safe.